Greetings and salutations, all you beautiful people, and welcome to another episode of Art of the Beholder, a show dedicated to all things eclectic in the world of art, where we do deep dives into deep cuts and help you understand why damn things matter. I'm your host, Novo, and today we're going to be talking about art in music and theater, focusing on singer, songwriter, pianist, record producer, and dancer Kate Bush. To hash it out, I am joined by guest Ron.D.Butler, a New Yorker born in Mississippi, a jack of many trades who is currently practicing art photography, and a lifelong Kate Bush fan that also got to kind of grow up with her alongside Kate's blossoming career. So this is perfect. I'm so excited to chat with Ron today because he's going to give us some excellent perspective, and we'll probably meet in the middle. So, Mr. Butler, welcome to the show.
Thanks. It's great to be here.
I have been eating, drinking, and sleeping Kate Bush all week. And I don't know if we talked about this, Ron, but I had been wanting to do this show for a long, long time, even before Stranger Things made her an international star again. And so I'm so happy that you're here today. You're going to give us some great insight.
Well, great. Yeah, I'm reaching back into my memory of what it was like, back in the day. So
back in the day, indeed, because Kate Bush has always lived in a fascinating world in the music industry. Because in the States, she is often considered indie fan favorite, but in the UK, she is already a mainstream pop outlier. So just to put it in perspective, so she's had incredible success in the UK, but for some reason, and definitely in the States, she just has never quite found the same appeal. So she became the very first artist to achieve a UK #1 hit with a self-written song ever in the history of UK billboards. Now, sometimes as she went through her career, she sometimes would have, the foot in both worlds a little. She got a lot more recognition, obviously, after the huge magnum opus that is Hounds of Love and Essential World and things like that. But it never was quite hitting like we've seen her in the last year. And part of that is because of Stranger Things. Now, what's crazy is she already carved out this incredible artistic independence for her time. She was even self-producing her studio album since 1982 with The Dreaming. But it wasn't until Stranger Things came around that highlighted her sound and brought her to a international audience like we've never seen before. And more importantly, a brand new audience, a younger audience, and maybe getting a level of recognition she never thought possible. So, Mr. Butler, I gotta ask you first, how old were you when you first got into Kate Bush? What year was it, and what was your first impression?
Well, this would be 1980. I was 18.
All right.
So yeah, I was born and raised in Mississippi and had sort of a contained, sheltered life. And in my junior,
how
senior,
so? Contained,
well,
shelter?
Just being conservative, Southern Baptist, So my junior, senior year in high school, things are starting to expand. I'm experiencing more and more music outside the realm I was raised in. And, going into college in 1980, I used to go down to Hattiesburg, Mississippi, where a lot of my friends were. And it's one of those sort of enclaves at the time where it was a place of enlightenment for me, at least.
Elaborate.
And, yeah. So you'd go down and there'd be parties and, all of a sudden I'm discovering Carlos Castaneda or finding a drag club or, whatever. So I remember going down to a party at my friend Earl's place and hanging out, whatever. And all of a sudden somebody drops a needle on Never Forever.
That was the very first LP you ever listened to?
Yeah. And I remember walking across the room going, who is this? And somebody said, oh, it's Kate Bush. She's from England, blah, blah, blah. And I grabbed the album cover and I think I just completely ignored everyone the rest of the night. I just sat with the album cover, reading it top to bottom, back and forth, listening to the side. And as soon as I could find it in a record store, I bought it and I wore the grooves out of it. And, and then I started buying the albums that came before, Lionheart and The Kick Inside.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I was immediately hooked by what she was doing. It wasn't just that she was a great songwriter, theatrical. This album also sounded different from anything else I was listening to at the time.
I think that's a good segue to get us prepared for the discussion section, because that's a good kind of sub-thesis for our main thesis. She is something that we've never had before, never heard before. And though there are influences clearly and inspirations Definitely by I don't want to go down a long rabbit hole. We'll just say Mr. Stardust definitely influenced her. But what I love about Kate Bush, and chime in if you have anything to piggyback on here, is the fact that I cannot compare her to really anything. Kate Bush is Kate Bush, and she is eternally unique.
I think too, she came on the scene very young and she already knew who she was.
Right.
I mean, she had a grasp on what she could do, what she couldn't do, who she needed to lean on to get there. I mean, she was wise at a very young age. It immediately shows in the material and how she approached it and what she would do for the sake of the song and the story. She wasn't just going to sing pretty and whatnot. She could make her voice ugly, terrifying, and it sold the song. And it's like, of course, why wouldn't you do that?
Yeah, we call it, or I like to call it, I guess in the industry, it's called, vocal gymnastics.
Yeah.
So yeah, she was very, even before she hooked up with Lindsay Kemp, that was a mime and dancing instructor. I mean, she was theatrical clearly before she was formally trained, and that just bled right into her musicality. And yeah, like you put it perfectly, she already had a fully realized sound before she ever, and she, as a kid, if you've done as much homework as we have, I mean, she was writing hundreds and hundreds of songs as like a teenager, as an adolescent, like such an incredible scope of musicianship. Now, before we get there, of course, we all need a little background. So Kate Bush was born Catherine Bush on July 30th, 1958, in Buxley Heath, Kent, England. Now, what's great about her history, I'm not going to spend too much time on her history because I want to get to the discussion section, is David Gilmour, yes, that David Gilmour of Pink Floyd fame, helped discover her. A lot of people don't know that, and more importantly, helped her produce a demo tape, which ultimately led to a record deal with EMI Records. And the rest, as they say, is history. To this day, she has made 10 studio albums, 2 live albums, 2 compilation albums, and 5 EPs. Now, before we can hash it out, though, of course, we need a little word from our sponsor. This episode is brought to you by the novel The Entropy Sessions, a tale of loss, love, and madness in our past, present, and future relationships with technology. Find it on Amazon and as an audiobook through Audible. Your support helps us continue our journey. Now back to the show. So now we are going to dive headfirst into the discussion section. We already touched on a couple of things. Before we start going through her discography, as we like to do on this show, and focus on the art, I'd like to hear a little more from you, Mr. Butler, on how would you, if someone has never heard her music before, ever, you were starting to touch on this a little bit in that beauty and ugliness, that terror, that thoughtfulness, and her vocal stylings. But how would you describe her music to someone that's never heard it before?
She's gifted at being able to write a play inside your head.
I like that.
The way she talks about, the way she does her lyrics and couches things, she definitely gives her intent and her narrative, but she gives enough space for you to step in it and bring your meaning into it. And so I think she means different things to different people.
Absolutely. Well,
yeah. She's surprising, even like on the first couple of albums.
Definitely with the Dreaming. Oh my God! Like what a bonkers series of compositions. We'll get there.
But even going back to like Lionheart, I mean, these are very like soft, lilting sort of songs, but don't rely on that because it actually. She takes you into places you don't expect to go, lyrically, sonically.
Yes, it's like when I was trying to describe it for the good people listening, I would call it like a sonic hit and run.
Yeah.
Because like when I was going through her discography again, time and time again, I was just surprised. It felt like it was all over the place. And that's such a testament to, you have to, good art, music, especially music. Sometimes you have to give it time to get into it and let it settle into your mind and digest it, because it is, especially, everything up until like Hounds of Love and definitely Essential World, it was a little hard to digest. And I think that's probably part of the reason that she maybe wasn't as big in the US as she was in the UK. And there was a theatrical element that, when you would see old videos of her and seeing her doing these interpretive dancing that we just, we weren't used to in the States, because we were used to, Michael Jackson's like perfectly syncopated, moves to the music, things like that, not these very whimsical, strange, things that we kind of make fun of, honestly, in America. And I think they take a lot more seriously in the UK.
Don't forget the early video effects too on those
Oh
on those.
God, Jesus Christ!
Yeah.
they, they did, guys. They didn't age well. I encourage everyone listening to just YouTube a couple of them. It's a lot of fun. You'll see a lot of Kate Bush eye flares in there when she goes into the chorus and things like that.
Sat down on your lap is a great one to start with.
Yeah. I started with videos even from like the Kick Inside, the Lionheart stuff. It's just, yeah, it's a sonic hit and run because it's so polyrhythmic, especially with vocal harmonies. It's so dense. It's very eclectic. She would use a lot of layered sounds like synths, and is incredibly textured because of that. And you put a note in our outline that I was going to touch on, but I'm glad you did. So back in the day, now we take this for granted because we all have phones now, but there was a sampling device called the Fairlight, and you could essentially sample anything. So when you hear like glass breaking and stuff, and Hounds of Love or whatever the track is from the album, that is from the Fairlight. And so since she was a trained pianist, it was essentially like a whole new palette of textures to choose from. And we saw it in some bonkers, Mad Hatter ways, like in The Dreaming, and stuff to like really excellent effect, even down to 50 words for snow, things like that. So I loved what she did. And I think part of the reason we have never, heard anything quite like Kate Bush is I think her real inspiration, when you get right down to it in the history, is from her brother Patty.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, and she knew how to incorporate him into her pieces too. You know, just listening to Never Forever, how he's like in the background singing like just these odd things.
Oh my God, yes, like all over the place with some of these like vocal. Well, she liked layered vocal harmonies, but it would be. I don't think I'll ever forget the impression of a donkey from the end of Dreaming for the rest of my life.
And that's what I was talking about. The ugliness. She could go there. I mean, that's a terrifying sound she's making.
I think we should dive in. I think that's a good way. The donkey hee-haw that you heard at the end of The Dreaming is a good segue to just go ahead and talk about her art through her discography. So in 1978, we have The Kick Inside. And this is where we have singles like Moving, Strange Phenomena, Kite, The Man with the Child in His Eyes, and Wuthering Heights. So Wuthering Heights was the very first single she ever put out. And right away, and I'm going to tee you up with this again, Ron, is by saying she already, there was no development of a sound. Like a lot of artists, it takes them an album or two to find their sound, their quote unquote sound. She had she was a visionary. She had a vision for what she wanted to write and how she wanted it to sound immediately.
Yeah, I think it did take her an album or two to get the tools she needed to make the sound
the
she
production
wanted.
side, right?
Yeah, like having the Fairlight later on to make the samples and play. The first two albums would have been very different had she had that. You're just triggering a memory. Recently I saw a video of, I think there's a staged event. People who come out and do Wuthering Heights, they all dress in the same dress. It's like 1,000 people. They play the music really loudly, and they all do the choreography together.
Oh my God, yes. Oh
yeah,
God.
Yeah. So so
it's
on YouTube somewhere. Yeah,
definitely
check that out.
What's some of your favorite tracks from this first LP?
Man with a Child in His Eyes sticks out. I mean, that was one of those things where it kind of, I don't know, it just kind of grabbed me. The softness of it, how she, talked about this person.
And she's famous for that too, with her lyrics. She is often, kind of in the vein of just her musical stylings and her musicality. People really like to analyze her lyrics because, time and time again, they have this moment of, who writes this? Like who the hell is thinking about this thing in this context and in this way? And Kate Bush was doing that at like 17. Like times when like I definitely was not doing that at 17. I was well, we won't go there. I was definitely not as progressive as Kate Bush.
The song Them Heavy People.
Yeah.
After hearing that, I'm like, so who's Gurdjieff? I'm like going to the bookstore in Mississippi trying to find books about him to find out what is she talking about.
Yeah, she loved. This is an excellent point to touch on. She loved literature. She was a huge reader, and she would put quotes or versions of what she read. I think the most famous example is the Central World. She used lines from Joyce's Ulysses, utilizing the repeating motif of the word yes, things like that, where we just, yeah, again, going back to our original thesis of we just never saw this. And if you were to describe the genre of music that she writes, how would you try to describe it to people?
Oh wow. Okay.
Like, is it, it's not just pop, right? If that's an easy umbrella term for her
I
sound,
think
but
she comes out of the art rock. I always thought of her,
yeah,
and maybe that's where because that's kind of what I was listening to before I found her.
yeah.
The early Genesis,
Oh yeah.
that kind of
King
stuff.
Crimson, all those
Right,
guys. Yeah.
exactly. So, I mean, she comes out of that. Everything's got a story. It's all about your imagination going. You're lying on the floor with the album cover in your hands, listening, with headphones on, and it's just taking you off somewhere. She comes out of that. Her albums always were that for me too. So, I mean, it was a great thing that she connected with Gilmore. Pink Floyd. I would do the same thing with their albums. You just kind of drift off, let it carry you. But it's also like she's reading you a book too.
Yes,
Telling you
that's
stories.
that's a good way to put it. Yeah,
Yeah.
yes. So when I was really trying to rack my brain and trying to describe this to someone that's never heard Kate Bush again, because though we don't have a huge following, I imagine there's people that are listening that are either going to be huge Kate Bush fans and they definitely know more than me, and there's going to be people on the other end of the spectrum that have no idea still who she is. Because yeah, to this day, I still talk to people. I can't believe this. Probably not anymore since Stranger Things, but I can't. I'll be talking music with people at a party, and I'll bring up Kate Bush, and I consistently get who, and I'm like,
Yeah.
well, let me enlighten you. But if I were to describe her sound, her genre to people, it would be I kept hearing alt rock or alt pop, like alternative pop, and even prog rock to your art rock. And I thought, what a good combination of since part of the thesis is there's truly no one like her. I always did a pretty, with our other shows, I've always done a pretty good job of trying to think of, okay, this person was clearly influenced by this person, and so they're a lot like X, Y, and Z, where I can't really do that with Kate Bush, and so I've been calling her prog pop.
Right.
That's what I've settled on.
Well, from the literary standpoint, the only other comparison I could make is the first two Ambrosia albums.
Mm,
Uh, I mean, that is just chock full of literature of all sorts. I mean, you've got Jabberwocky, you've got Kurt Vonnegut,
yeah.
and it's just all over the place. Um, and that's the only thing I think I can compare to her albums with regards to the literature aspect of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And that leads us to Lionheart, which was also done in 1978. So the reason that she released two LPs in 1 year was this was, the Suits in the background saying, okay, well, we had some success with The Kick Inside. We need to push that success with more music. And so a lot of she famously disliked this album for a long time. And I guess I can kind of see why. I wouldn't call them B-sides since she has such a volume of compositions. Clearly was always in her brain and that she willed into existence. Are they some of the is some of the best work on this list? No, but it definitely deserves its own spotlight. So this had singles Symphony in Blue, Wow, and Hammer Horror. And Wow is a good song. It's the same reason this is one of the shortest ones, but it's often rated the lowest.
Yeah, I mean, I would also include "Don't Push Your Foot on the Heartbreak." That one, listening to it today, I was like, it's got some meat and potatoes to it,
Yeah.
And Hammer Horror. I mean, anytime you can talk about that whole genre of horror films, great, let's do it.
So yeah, I didn't want to. I didn't want to spend too much time on this because there was so much more meat and potatoes. I'll use your line later on in her discography. Is there anything else you want to touch on before we move on to your introduction to Kate Bush with Never Forever 1980?
No, not at the moment. I'm sure something will crop up in my head in a minute.
Yeah, we'll come back to it. So 1980, Never Forever. I feel like this is kind of in the vein of what you were talking about. She was finding herself. I still feel like there was a fully realized world with how she wanted to make these compositions and these movements, and definitely the textured, the musicality of it, right? The lines, the guitar lines versus
I
the
think
bass
this
lines and
album
drums.
also falls into the category of almost a perfect album. I mean, you drop the needle on the
Really?
first, and it just plays through. And I
I
don't
would
really
push
find
back
a.
on you a little bit there. You think it's a perfect album?
I mean, there's probably some that are more perfect, but I think it goes from top to bottom as a very continuous, solid piece.
Okay. I always felt like these first three albums were so dense though. Like I when I was preparing for the show and listening to these albums over and over again, I would often see what track I'm in, in the session, and I thought, "Oh man, I must have been listening to this for over an hour." And none of them clocked in. There would be like, I think this one's like 36 minutes, something like that. It is, I have to look it up, 37 minutes and 16 seconds. So they're very short albums. They're very tight. But they're just so. And I think that part of that, sonic hit and run thing was part. I think it was probably because probably the difference between me and you and something like this is, since you cut your teeth here, and I
Hmm.
cut my teeth way later with like the Sensual World, the Red Shoes, things like that,
Right.
and so
And
my
and
is
that's when I start waning on her material.
Oh,
So
really? Okay. See,
yeah.
I'm the opposite. That's where I started to. I think I'll tell you and I like a good debate. So if you disagree, I'd love to hear your opinions. There is an album that I think is a perfect album down the road, and you may. So you think her later work is a little not doesn't land quite as well.
I started kind of backing off around Hounds of Love. The
Mm.
Dreaming Hounds of Love I liked, but I was also noticing she was getting into sort of that 2 chord groove thing,
She was
or
getting
single
into
chord groove.
a
You know,
comfort zone for sure.
yeah,
Yeah,
and it was just kind of like same, same, same. I mean,
autopilot maybe.
yeah, it was still quality, but it
Yeah.
was just and things in my life. It just kind of took me in a different direction musically. I started listening to something else.
Do
So
you play anything? Are you a
yeah,
musician?
I've been playing banjo since I was 7.
Oh man.
Guitar,
Oh, we
uh,
need a little banjo solo one of these days,
yeah, one of these
Ron.
days, sure.
We'll have
Um,
you on the show just for that.
sure, why not? Yeah, I play guitar and I play saxophone too.
Okay, so you have a lot of music theory chops, and
Yeah,
in the back.
eh,
So when you're listening to these things, you're listening to it as like a guitar player, a banjo player, things
right.
like
And I've
that.
also been an audio engineer too, so I
Okay.
kind of, from a production standpoint, listen to things that way.
I have a question for you then. Okay, so these first probably until Hounds of Love days. When she started taking over production, I when I was listening to it, especially when I listened to the whole discography and then I started over with the Kick Inside in 1978, I always felt like something was missing, and then I realized she has a lot of middle and treble, but she never would produce her songs with a lot of low end, a lot of bass.
Yeah, I agree with that. She really she kept it in the upper range, and I think it also,
Her vocal too
yeah, it would
shined
accentuate
through that.
that
It
sort
would
of
cut.
high end. She's got, warble is the wrong word, but she's up there a lot of times in the upper register.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, her register is so huge.
Yeah,
Like especially using it like an instrument. She
right.
would be so powerful with, I mean, just going back to the album we're on right now, Never Forever with Babushka. I mean, like just hitting those notes that really would cut through the mix, even without like a doubled layered vocal too. I mean,
Right.
she would use that, through choruses and stuff, but a lot of the time I was just like re-listen to these albums just to really dissect what she's doing with her vocal.
Yeah, I mean, it's, she's up in the upper register, and she's using that either to be sort of, enticing and cute, or to be terrifying up there. And then she'll
Yeah,
drop down,
the
and it
donkey. the donkey
Yeah, she'll
stuff.
do the donkey, and she'll drop down, and all of a sudden it's very intimate and close, like your mother is singing to you.
That's a good way. Yeah,
And
good way to
she's
put
kind
it.
of just, and she could do it within a measure.
What's crazy is as much as I tried to read as much background on her as possible, she never was formally trained though, right? I mean, she had training from her brothers and stuff like that, but she never had like a singing coach, or did she?
I don't know. I always got the impression that maybe she got a little bit after the fact.
Hmm. Yeah, I
Once
could
she
see
had
that.
signed with a label, they're like, hey, let's work on the breathing.
Let's Yeah, let's sharpen the skill of
yeah,
yours.
which is not an uncommon practice,
Yeah,
back
that's
then.
true. I feel like there was maybe some emulation in the beginning, and then maybe some sharpening after the fact. So, never forever. Final word before we move on.
I don't know. I mean, I love this album. you know,
That's a good final
um,
word.
yeah, it's. I was listening to Delius today,
Yeah.
and just sort of a non sequitur song, but it stays in my head still.
Then what did you? Let's move on to the Dreaming 1982, because I feel like this is polarizing. You thought Never Forever was a perfect album. What are your thoughts on the Dreaming?
I would say this comes in as a number two for me.
Wow, number two. Okay.
Yeah. I don't know. Again, this is another one I approached and listened top to bottom over and over and over again. Yeah, I felt it was a bit more theatrical.
Very. Oh
Like
my God,
you could
yes.
definitely put this up on Broadway.
Absolutely. I was yeah, for another sub thesis, or just trying to describe her music to people, I would always say she was so theatrical. It was like she was writing pieces for a musical that never was. Like
Right.
she was writing these pieces for some musical that she was, commissioned. She was commissioned to make songs for, hypothetically, but then it just never happened. So she put it into her own discography.
Yeah. 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 I would say she's probably writing them and staging them in your head,
Hmm.
you know. So,
And that's probably a good segue also to her live performances, because this guys, if you've never seen this before, just YouTube her videos first, but then YouTube the live stuff too, because it was obviously singing, dancing, but again, a very interpretive kind of style of dancing, not your Michael Jacksons or your Backstreet Boys, not that syncopated, everyone's doing the same thing at the beat of the music. But also, like, it was mime, it was magic, it was lighting.
a lot of
I feel
Martha
like,
Graham in there.
yeah, like like I feel like she and I think we take this for granted with Kate Bush. She was really the first to combine a lot of those elements, and we see it today, and we take it for granted, like, oh well, that's just, they're an artist, they're a musician, so yeah, they have this big stage production. But I don't really I feel like when I would see old clips of, live, these big high number productions, I mean, outside of like Pink Floyd, that was like a whole nother level of production. But it's just the band playing. There wasn't a theatrical side to it,
Right.
and I feel like that made it so refreshing. I guess Bowie did it to an extent, but it still was not. I don't know. She still made it her own beast.
Well, she was doing video more or less before people were doing it, before MTV. I mean,
Right.
she was doing all the movement and the storytelling, and visuals, live show or on film.
Yeah. Yeah, I this, so this album, The Dreaming, is a lot.
Yeah,
We should start there. It's a lot. I guarantee, for anybody that is just, yeah, used to the hits, running up that hill and stuff like that, you're gonna listen to The Dreaming and you're gonna be like, uh, I mean, I even with my first listen, I was like, this may be a little too much for me. And I love weird. I love avant garde, and this was a challenge.
yeah,
But I grew an appreciation for it, like you.
yeah. If you want to get to know your neighbors, turn up, get out of my house really loud.
So that's the guys. That's the last track on the album that has the impression of the donkey hee haws at the end.
Yeah,
But I feel like it evolves into that nicely, though. This is another. I think this is a perfect example of, like, this is why we have the album. Like, we needed Sat in Your Lap all the way to Get Out of My House to really bring you into that world and those theatrics. And I really like a lot of these pieces, like Sat in Your Lap, the actual The Dreaming, Night of the Swallow,
Yeah,
all the
all the
love,
love.
Houdini.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean it is really good. I wouldn't say it's an anomaly, is what it is.
yeah,
I feel like this is a testament to her entire career. I feel like the Kate Bushes of the world may not get the opportunities that Kate Bush got. Like I when I look at her career and the music she made, I think to myself, how did this even happen? Because I guess I'm so used to like the industry now and studying it, and unless it had perfect hooks and choruses, and it was that very bubblegum pop that was easy to digest and made sold a million copies on day one. If it's not that, then they brush it aside. But they took a chance with Kate Bush, and she just kept making music to this
yeah.
day.
And I think she was surrounded by people who understood who she was, what her talent was,
That's true.
and they weren't trying to make her be
Something
something
else,
else. Yeah,
right?
exactly. I mean, she's very lucky that way. You know.
I think that's a perfect way to put it, because yeah, the more I studied her, and I'd watch a documentary on her before the show, for research purposes, I I could tell right away that she was like a musician's favorite. Like, and not just like anybody, like the David Gilmours of the world,
A
and
musician's
all these,
musician.
yeah, exactly. All these contemporaries, Elton John, things like that. They just were always, they almost admired her. She was just a fan favorite within that community of artists.
Exactly. You just remember making me remember here locally in New York. There's a show Live at Five back in the '80s, and she came on in the afternoon to do an interview before
Hmm.
a show, and she was just so charming and intelligent. And I mean, she wowed Sue Simmons, who was the interviewer.
Mm.
I think you can still find that on YouTube also.
Oh, cool.
But it was a great interview.
Yeah, I loved watching just interviews of her, because she had this innocence about her. Like she it didn't seem like she was putting on a face. Like, you see a lot of people that do these, and you can tell they're acting, they're in a mode.
And you could tell she wasn't putting up with bullshit either.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, she was holding her own at a very young age.
I think she's famous for really putting her foot down, for being like, no, we're going to go in this. I mean, obviously, clearly, Lionheart is a good example of, there was pushback. It's like, we want you to still be a financial success, but she would put her foot down. I think that's why she started self-producing. She's like, no, I'm taking over. I don't know. No, fuck you guys.
Yeah,
It's time for me to take over now. So that leads us to 1985, Hounds of Love, which is arguably, a lot of people would call this her magnum opus. I would like to respectfully disagree. I think it is a great album. It's often considered her best, her magnum opus, and it has the track "Running Up That Hill" to open it. Though for all you Kate Bush heads out there, we all know it's really called "To Deal with God." That's what she wanted to call it originally, and the record label made her change it, because they had fears that it would rub people the wrong way, because it has God in the title. So to this day, it's called "Running Up That
I
Hill."
think REM was having a problem with that at the time.
I think, well, oh God, just don't go down that rabbit hole. I feel like a lot of artists had a hard time talking about religiosity and, yeah, things of that nature. So I'm gonna go, since this is the magnum opus, I'm just gonna go through the track titles real quick, and then I want to talk about how she broke this up. So side one is called, so the group of songs, the first 5 tracks are called Hounds of Love. That's Running Up That Hill, Deal with God, Hounds of Love. Track 3 is The Big Sky. 4 is Mother Stands for Comfort. 5 is Cloud Busting. And then on the other side is what she called the ninth wave. This is track 6, The Dream of Sheep Under Ice, Waking the Witch, Watching You Without Me, Jig of Life. That's a great track. And Hello Earth and The Morning Fog, another great track. So if any of you guys just recently got into Kate Bush and you're wondering why it sounds like there's 2 albums here, that's by design. So she kind of put the hits on the first 5, and then she put the weird avant-garde experimental stuff she likes to work with on the second half, because remember, this was also a relic of its times, because we had vinyl or tapes where you had to turn it over and you'd have a completely different kind of world to fall into.
First side, Cloud Busting and The Big Sky were my favorites.
Yeah, and those were like, the experimental ones of the hits too.
Right. And and here she is leaning into that 2-chord groove that I was talking about, and still using Fairlight's, getting these timbres and textures. That's just wonderful.
Yeah.
The second side, I think Hello Earth, Jig of Life, I liked. Waking the Witch to me is a lot like Get Out of My House. It's a screamer kind of.
Yes, understatement sometimes. I like the Morning Fog too, the closer. I just, this is one where you gotta listen to it over and over. You gotta give it time. You gotta digest it. It is even with the first side, with the hits, the quote unquote hits, even though they are still very experimental and very avant garde, it's still gonna take some time to get into. And that's why I think, again, going back to, we saw so many musicians just say like, this what's that inspired me. Even Big Boy from Outkast, one of the biggest rappers of the 90s and 2000s, to this day says Hounds of Love was a huge inspiration.
Yeah, I mean, it's got a lot going on in so many levels. So it's going to appeal to a wide variety
lot of different people. Oh my God.
For very different reasons.
Now, do you think it's the magnum opus? Or do you think Never Forever and The Dreaming Are?
I would put those three together. I think, she really, she hit upon something with that. I think with Never Forever, she did something that, for me, there's certain albums that stand out because they sound very different. Tom Waits' Swordfish Trombones and Peter Gabriel's third album,
who she collaborated with on song.
Right. So it's not only just, the quality of writing and the musicianship, it's how it sounds, what they brought into it, the sampling. I mean,
True.
we're still looking at a time where, if you remember, we were changing over from analog to digital at this point. So people were still recording analog and then mastering for a CD.
Yeah, that is a good point.
So it would, you were still able to get some of that quality of the warmth and the bandwidth and depth of an analog recording. And they improved the CDs over time to match that. I mean, now you can do the whole thing on your computer at home.
Right. With Pro Tools or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. But there was just something about, getting it on that tape and the way they worked with it, bringing digital instruments in, the sampling and so forth.
Yeah, I think this is a good, calling it, I mean, informally, kind of like a trilogy of albums that kind of are linked together. And we see that a lot with artists. They sometimes it's purposeful. Sometimes they meant to make a trilogy of albums, like the Berlin trilogy,
exactly.
Going back to Bowie, something like that. And sometimes it's accidental. I feel like Dark Side and Wish You Were Here and The Wall, even though there was an album in the middle of that. Those ran together. They didn't quite mean for them be housed together in this kind of sonic world, but we, as the listeners and the audience, we find those things, right? It's the human condition. We have to categorize everything, right?
Well, that goes back to what I was saying. She does her thing, but she leaves room for you to bring your meaning into it and make your own associations.
Yeah. It's like sonic paintings in that regard.
That's actually a great. I was listening to her today, and I was thinking she is a painter and a sculptor.
Yes,
more than a musician sometimes.
Oh yeah, I think she would even agree with that if we could interview her.
I mean, several times I'm listening to a song, and I can just imagine her lightly placing the brush on the canvas and going, "Okay, see this." You see this?
Yeah, no, that's it. I can't see that, and I know Kate Bush is probably listening. She's a huge fan of this show. That's what we hear. So Kate, if you're listening, if you want to be on the show, we'd love to hear your your take on some of these theories we have. So just let us know. Okay. So now we are in the second half of her discography with 1989's The Sensual World. So I will start with this and then I'll pass it to you. I think this is a perfect album. Rebuttal?
Well, this was about
you can
the time.
Push back. Let's debate.
This may say more about me than her, but I was at a point in my life where I was starting to move away from her catalog. I started to listen to other things. So I maybe didn't pay as much attention to what was going on at this point.
I think here's my argument. Here's why I feel that way is I think it really came together. I still feel like that enough of the experimental stuff was there, the avant-garde, but then the production was there. I finally started it's like every album was I got a little more low end, a little more low end, back to back to back, and this is where I feel like it started to really come together. Of course it really, I mean, we'll get there, but it really came together with 50 Words for Snow. But I started to see it just the production and the sound, the quality was for lack of a better word, a little more well-rounded,
Right.
and her using strings and other things to harmonize with. I think it's a perfect album.
Yeah, I'm not going to dispute that. Like I said, I listened to it,
You
but
can. Let's argue. Come on,
but
Ron.
no, no. You kind of brought to mind. John Zorn brought up a thing about there is no bad music. There's only badly done music. And one of the other things I noticed or heard him talk about was using different styles to get from point A to point B.
Mm-hmm.
And I find that's also in her work too. And, changing the instruments, changing the song style, whatever, to be true to the idea of whatever it is she's writing for that particular song.
I think it is also, art is subjective. So,
Well, she's not parked in one place musically. So,
well, and I am also just like I think, it does come down. I guess my point is it does come down to taste a little bit because just like when you were describing the things you liked in the beginning of her catalog, I partly I think I'm in love with the Central World. I've always been a sucker for strings and those kind of arrangements, and so a lot of the things she decided to do with this is the stuff I've always kind of been in love with, anyways. So
right.
that's why I probably gravitated it towards that. And I think we, quote unquote, she got kind of to an autopilot or she got into a comfort zone with the middle part of that first half too. I feel like she did that a little bit too with like the Red Shoes in 1993 and definitely Ariel. I feel like every track on Ariel, though solid, is right in the middle of the road. It's not really, it's just simple songwriting. It's not crazy experimental, with like the dreaming stuff. It's not jokingly poppy like the Red Shoes can be sometimes with like Rubber Band Girl, for
Right.
example. It was right in the middle. I'm shocked. She must have had so much material in her head to make a double LP in 2005 of her whole discography. But so yeah, I kind of pair those two together, the Red Shoes and Ariel. What do you think of those guys?
I think I gave him a listen through once or twice, and it just didn't hold me.
And one more for the show, right? It just wasn't hitting for you then.
Yeah,
Huh?
it wasn't.
Okay.
I think too. You're growing older. More mature. You start to say things in a different way,
Sure.
and it's not really reaching out and grabbing people the way the early material was.
Sure, that is very true. The early material would strangle you to listen to it. Oh my god. Where this one was I hate to use the word safe. It wasn't, her music has never been quote unquote safe. It's just, yeah, it wasn't as experimental
Yeah,
or
I
hard to
mean the quality
digest.
was always there.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
And the production choices. Like I always felt like she always kind of still stayed on the higher end, treble end of how she liked to produce her work.
right.
So still good. And another thing I made a note on is I don't know if this was accidental or purposeful, but every time I would hear an album, and especially in this later work where it was very spread out. So like in 1993's The Red Shoes, that sounded like an 80s album to me. Like the production sounded like it was from the 80s, the song composition, etc. Whereas when we got to Ariel in 2005, that sounded like an album from the 90s with how they used to still, record music to tape with analog, but it still had that very quintessential 90s sound. And it wasn't until, honestly, we can go ahead and speed up to 50 Words for Snow. It wasn't until that, and there was a huge gap. So, guys, this is just a recap. So, The Sensual World was in 1989, The Red Shoes was in 1993, Ariel was in 2005, so big jump. And then there was two albums back to back, Director's Cut, which we're not going to talk about a lot because so a Director's Cut was a rearrangement of her old material, like literally re-recording music, which is, so give it a listen, but it's nothing necessarily new except for the production and the arrangements. Whereas 50 Words for Snow, and this was 2011 again, it was a jazz album essentially. And I will pass it back to you with this statement. This is a close second to the sensual world for me. I think it's a perfect album.
Yeah, I would agree too. I mean, I did listen to that more than once or twice. So, um, yeah, and again, the maturing thing you find too when you move through material, you tend to start revisiting things of your parents.
Yeah.
I mean, Elvis Costello does that. So reaching back to grab something to bring it forward.
I was excited to talk to you about this because even though we live in different or we grew up in different generations, I I've always found music to be timeless. And believe it or not, the late 60s and 70s to this day is still my favorite era of music. I actually feel more. I feel like I was born in the wrong era. I feel more attuned to that music, like Led Zeppelin and well, obviously the rock stuff. So yeah,
Right.
Cream and Jimi Hendrix and the stuff that obviously a lot of men like. But then I started to get into like the weird, Can and Mahavishnu Orchestra, and you already named Genesis, and we called King Crimson, and I think for her to go back again, for all the sounds she could have chose, I could have easily seen her do a completely EDM, like electronic, not dance music, but just electronica kind
Right.
of sound. But she decided to write essentially a jazz album with Stephen Fry's beautiful vocals saying words for snow.
Right.
It's funny when I say it that
I mean, it's poetic even.
way.
um, no, it's just making me think of what Chrissy Hynde released a jazz album a year or so ago, but that reaching back
Yeah.
to bring forward. I mean, I think we have lived in an age of recombination, for decades. Taking
Mhm.
something and just like refreshing.
Well, I do think that is the wave of the future. I think if we're because I think the biggest criticism I have when I talk to people that are really big musicologists or just music historians is there's nothing except for electronic music. There's nothing new. There was so many different genres at what I call the age of the musical age of popular music enlightenment, which is late 60s and 70s, because we had jazz and blues and Latin and all
Yeah.
these, and then there was cross pollination there, but it was distinctly different when we would get new things or funk like Parliament Funkadelic and things like that. Whereas now we don't see a lot of that, and I think if we're going to ever push through that, I think it's still a glass ceiling. We'll probably find some new genres in time. It'll have to be with combining things we've never ever even thought to combine before. So it's really refreshing to see someone like she's in her 60s now, still doing great, killing it, writing music and combining things like she's never combined before. Mr. Ron Butler, take us home. Why study the great Kate Bush?
She really does embody that literary theatrical themes and the way she approaches textures, melodies, rhythms. There's a lot to learn from her. Especially if you're a musician, to be able to pull away. I think about the women who came after her. Fiona Apple.
God, she inspired so Bjork,
Yeah,
St. Vincent these days. I
right.
mean,
But
the
but
list is
she
endless.
basically walked up to them and said, "Here's these tools I developed. Go be yourself."
Exactly. That is a good point to make. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, I think that's one of her biggest legacies is what she inspired in other people.
I think that's a perfect way to end it. There you go, guys. The life, legacy, and career of Miss Kate Bush. I want to thank you guys for listening. I want to thank my guest, Ron Butler. Thanks for doing this. It was an excellent perspective, as I knew it would be. And we got here to the other end. But before we go, you guys know we got a little more for you, a little icing on the cake, a little cherry on top with what we call the gem of the week. If you don't know what the gem of the week is, it's something we like to talk about here at the end of our shows. That doesn't always fit into the scheme of the episode because it may just be on our radar in the last day, last week, or maybe last month, but we want to give it to you guys so you guys can dig deeper. Before we dive in, of course, we got to hear from their sponsor. Today's gems are sponsored by Zencastr. Zencastr is our go-to tool for remote podcast recordings. What's great is that you can record separate audio and video tracks, and it's all backed up on a secured cloud, so you never lose your hard work. Even better, it's easy to use, and there's nothing to download. So go to zen.ai, that's zen.ai/art of the beholder, or just use promo code Art of the Beholder and get 30% off your first 3 months with the pro account. Now back to the gems. Mine is I watched a BBC documentary on Kate Bush. It was literally called The Kate Bush Story, running up that hill in 2014. And I think it just perfectly encapsulates her career. If you need something with to give you that visual element, besides just the show, listen and watch the BBC documentary on Kate Bush, and I think you'll be pleasantly surprised on how well it captures her career.
This summer, I fell in love with the album Wary plus Strange, Amythyst Kiah. She comes out of the genre of Black women who are trying to reclaim country music.
Oh, okay.
But this particular album, I think, ties into our subject matter in that it's one of those albums that sounds different. And it was the first album I've heard in a really long time that just made me sit up and go, wow. The way she produced it, recorded it, her choices, it threw me back to Kate Bush. It threw me back to Peter Gabriel, Tom Waits. Just that, this is a new way of playing a song.
And this is, correct me if I'm wrong, so this is Amythys, right? And
ST.
K-I-S-T.
No, K-I-A-H. Amythyst Kiah.
Amythyst Kiah. K-I-A-H. And it's Wary and Strange, right?
I think it's Wary plus Strange. Or it could be Wary and Strange. But yeah, it's a country album that's different. I mean, imagine Peter Gabriel producing.
Ooh, that's a good selling point.
Yeah.
Because I would argue we haven't done a tangent corner all show. We've been so professional, guys. And that's thanks to Ron. So we'll do a little tangent corner here at the gyms at the end. So I am not a huge country fan because of what country has turned into, and which is I have always criticized it a little bit for being pop music with the twang. Now, don't get me wrong. Let me say this. I love country music when it's quote unquote real or true country. So, your Johnny Cash's, your Hank Williams,
right.
your, that kind of stuff. I feel like when they're just singing about beer and tailgates and it's just pop music. Right?
A lot of it's an excuse to do bad pop music.
There you go. I like it.
Yeah. So
But Miss Kiah, this isn't bad. This is Peter Gabriel's production of country music.
Yeah, it feels like he would have done it, but it speaks well to her that she did this production, and knocked this out. She works with a bunch of other ladies, Rihanna Giddens, and I forgot who the other two are. They revisit old time country music that used to be played before white people took it over.
So check it out, guys. Wary plus Strange, or Wary and Strange. And if you like that, of course, you can check us out at novodayproductions.com. There you'll find things, as already stated, like the Entropy Sessions, Post Meridium, Adulteration, Cancel Culture Lotto. Of course, you'll see more ads for these shows. Check out our other shows. You can always like and subscribe and do all the things. You know what to do. And rate and review, all that shit. You know what to do. It doesn't matter. And if you'd like to sponsor our little love child here, or if you'd like to be on the show, you can reach out to us at novodaymedia@gmail.com. Now, Mr. Ron Butler, as already stated, he is an art photographer. Now, if someone wanted to commission you for your work or wanted to look you up and dig into your artistry, how could they do that, Ron?
Well, I guess you could say I'm kind of old school. I still use Facebook. You can find me at Ronald.D.Butler on Facebook. I do Instagram, but I lurk there more than I actually put stuff out. And you could look there at Ron Butler or Ron B Photography.
And can people hire you for photography work to this day, or is it just
typically I'm doing more of my own art kind of thing.
Okay.
So, just getting stuff out into shows.
Okay. Like exhibitions and stuff?
Yeah.
Okay.
So,
is there anything on the horizon?
There's one here in New York coming up. It's escaping my mind what gallery it is. They'll probably never invite me back.
Well, email me, text me later. I'll put it in the liner notes.
Okay.
We can still promote it.
Yeah. I typically promote everything on my cover photos on Facebook. So
okay. So yeah, still the Facebook sounds like the best way to keep up to date. Well, perfect. Guys, check it out on his Facebook page. And until next time, you know what to do. Be good to each other. And as always, good luck and Godspeed. We love you.
Art of the Beholder is brought to you by Novo Day Productions. Created and hosted by Novo Day and the Novo Day Collective. Facebook.com/Novo Day Media, at Novo Day Media on Twitter and Instagram. Music by A Company. Facebook.com/ACoMusic123. ACO on Spotify. Logo design by Tom Justice, Jestus, of thejusticecompany.com. And executively produced by Clayton Anderson. All rights reserved.
I like that.